what my constant cry was that our biggest problem is our allies. Our allies in the region were our largest problem in Syria. The Turks were great friends, and I have a great relationship with Erdogan, which I've just spent a lot of time with. The Saudis, the Emiratis, etc. What were they doing? They were so determined to take down Assad and essentially have a proxy Sunni-Shia war. What did they do? They poured hundreds of millions of dollars and tens, thousands of tons of weapons into anyone who would fight against Assad, except that the people who were being supplied were al-Nusra and al-Qaeda and the extremist elements of jihadis coming from other parts of the world. Now you think I'm exaggerating? Take a look. Where did all of this go? So now what's happening? All of a sudden, everybody's awakened because this outfit called ISIL, which was al-Qaeda in Iraq, which when they were essentially thrown out of Iraq, found open space and territory in eastern Syria, worked with al-Nusra, who we declared a terrorist group early on, and we could not convince our colleagues to stop supplying them.
A new report shows Turkey was behind last year's sarin gas attack carried out by foreign-backed insurgents in Syria. The American investigative journalist Seymour Hersh has said in an article published in the London Review of Books that Turkey staged the gas attack to provoke a U.S. war on Syria.
As Syria continues to remove its chemical weapons arsenal under the monitoring of the United Nations, a new article by the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Seymour Hersh questions what happened last year in the Syrian city of Ghouta when hundreds of Syrians died in a chemical weapons attack. The United States and much of the international community blame forces loyal to the Assad government, and the incident almost led the U.S. to attack Syria. But according to Hersh, while President Obama and Secretary of State John Kerry were making the case for U.S. strikes, analysts inside the U.S. military and intelligence community were privately questioning the administration's central claim about who is behind the chemical weapons attack. According to Hersh, the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency issued a highly classified 5-page talking points briefing on June 19th, which stated the Syrian rebel group al-Nusra maintained a sarin production cell. According to the DIA, it was, quote, the most advanced sarin plot since al-Qaeda's pre-9/11 effort. The DIA document went on to state, quote, Turkey and Saudi-based chemical facilitators were attempting to obtain sarin precursors in bulk, tens of kilograms, likely for the anticipated large-scale production effort in Syria. A month before the DIA briefing was written, more than 10 members of al-Nusra were arrested in southern Turkey with what local police told the press were 2 kilograms of sarin. Investigative journalist Seymour Hersh now joins us from Washington, D.C. His latest piece is headlined The Red Line and the Rat Line. It was just published in the London Review of Books. Sy Hersh, welcome back to Democracy Now! Lay out what you found.
Well, you just laid out part of it. I think the most important thing about the document is that, as you know, I was on this show and the London Review did a piece that I wrote months ago questioning just the whole issue of who sarin was the title. It wasn't clear. This doesn't mean we know exactly what happened in eastern Ghouta. What we do know, I'm talking about the military, the Pentagon, and the analysts, is that the sarin that was recovered wasn't the kind of sarin that exists in the Syrian arsenal. It just raises a grave question about one of the basic elements of the president's argument for planning to go to war. The real point of this SHED document, and the reason I wrote so much about it, is because when I did that piece months ago, the White House said they know of no such document, and they have no information about sarin being in the hands of al-Nusra or other radical groups or jihadist groups inside Syria. Here's what's scary about it. What's scary about it is the military community. I know that the Southern Command, etc., very worried about this possibility. The war is going badly for some of these jihadist groups. They obviously, more than al-Nusra, other groups obviously have the capacity now to manufacture sarin with the help of Turkey. And the fear is that as the war goes bad, some of this sarin, you can call it a strategic weapon perhaps, when used right, it can kill an awful lot of people very quickly, is going to be shipped to their various units outside of Syria. In other words, they're going to farm out the chemicals they have, who knows where, in Northern Africa, Middle East, other places. And then you have a different situation that we are confronting in terms of the war on terror. That's the reality. Meanwhile, the White House's position, again, with this article, once again, even though this document they claim no longer existed, we ran a big chunk of it. Clearly, I have access to it. They are still insisting we know of no such document. This head-in-the-sand approach, it really has to do with something I write about in the article. I quote people as saying, once the president makes a decision, it's almost impossible to get it changed. The president decided that the Syrians did it, and we're justified in thinking that and continuing to think that. No other option exists. And so he's predicated a foreign policy which is a head-in-the-sand policy. Because meanwhile, we have a serious problem with these kind of weapons, particularly as Syria gets rid of the weapons. The only people inside Syria with those weapons are the wackos. And so there we are.
A new version of the Dark Ages in the 21st century. A concept synonymous with destruction, atrocity, and massacre. A new version of Americanized Islam with an al-Qaeda style, and a new bin Laden. A scheme that stems from Americans and Zionists to be executed in the heart of Islam. A scheme in the name of Islam, but in essence, one that serves America and Israel, known as Daesh.
نحن خلال هذه الثلاثة الأعوام الماضية ودخلنا في العام الرابع تعرضنا إلى مراحل وإلى ظروف قاسية وصعبة جدا كدعاة وخطباء وأئمة في مساجد هذا الوطن الحبيب، وذلك لأننا تصدينا للفكر الوهابي التكفيري الظلامي. الذي ضرب أمننا واستقرارنا والذي عمل على تشويه الحقائق وقلب الأمور رأساً على عقب.
حجي الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة. فجر كم ركعة؟ ها؟ 4 ركعات؟ فجر كم ركعة؟ الفجر 3 ركعات. 3 ركعات الفجر وأنت تقول 4 وأنت؟ قد 3 فجر 3.
America's token for the forceful gift of democracy is exporting these Takfiri terrorists to Syrian soil. Terrorists whose conquest of killing innocent people has put the Inquisition courts of the Middle Ages to shame.
بعض المجاميع الشاذة إلى لغة التكفير، فكر تكفيري، ومحاولة التعبير عن هذا بنزوة القتل وإشاعة قطع الرؤوس والركل الرؤوس وشق الصدور وما شكل ذلك. هذا نحن نحتاج إلى سلسلة آليات تتقدم لمواجهة هذه الظاهرة.
One cannot compromise with these Takfiri terrorists because they know no compromise and will regard it as fear and weakness. Hence, there is no way but conducting an armed jihad against them.
وظهرت أيضا بعض الدول التي لعبت بشكل مباشر عندما لم يستطع من أتي به للاستخدام على الأرض الميدانية كالمسلحين المرتزقة من كل بقاع العالم.
И братья решили, что присоединить к нам и укрепить ряды Дawlat al-Islam Ирак и Шам.
А воевать и война это лишь причина. То есть причина, чтобы это установить.
أكثر من 80,000 شخص دخلوا إلى سوريا لمحاربة سوريا وكلهم مدربون بشكل جيد جدا إما في الشيشان أو في يوغوسلافيا.
Alhamdulillah, сейчас начали восстанавливать куска, что нас никто не кушали. Иншаллах, наши силы будут объединить. И призываю все умму, и призываю все сыновей Дawlat al-Islam.
في جبال صربيا أو في أماكن أخرى قامت أجهزة، وفي الأردن وفي السعودية وفي كل الأماكن، وهناك 3 معسكرات في تركيا لتدريب هذه العصابات.
وجاءوا إلى سوريا ب83 دولة، جاءوا بشذاذ الآفاق ليقتلوا أبناءنا ويدمروا مصانعنا ومساجدنا. فكانت أول خطوة فعلوها في حلب أن سرقوا كل مصانعها، وهي مدينة فيها المصانع منذ 3000 سنة. لأول مرة تسرق حلب في التاريخ كما سرقت الآن، من بين المسلمين مع بعضهم البعض.
To find out about the true nature of Takfiri terrorists, it suffices to say that right at the time when their territory has engulfed Islamic countries, extending from the east to the west, down to about 300 kilometers away from European borders, the Israeli Minister of Defense, Moshe Yaalon, openly announces that no danger from Daesh or their al-Qaeda counterpart, the al-Nusra Front, threatens Israel.
يجب أن نعلم أن سوريا بالذات لم تعتد أن تعيش هذه الظروف التي نعيشها اليوم من حيث التفرقة الدينية التي نسمع بها. حقيقة على مر العصور خاصة في التاريخ الحديث لم يكن من عادة الإنسان السوري أن يسأل الإنسان الآخر عن دينه وعن انتمائه. سوريا شهدت تسامح ديني كبير، وكانت مثلا يحتذى به في بلاد كثيرة من حيث قبول الآخر والتسامح الديني الموجود.
The region Westerners call the Middle East is the birthplace of all prophets of God. Hence, a mixture of followers of all those religions live here in different countries, such as Syria. Therefore, it's no surprise that in every single part of Syrian cities, including Damascus, Christian churches stand alongside Muslim mosques. Despite such irrefutable proof suggesting the ages-long coexistence of religions and sects in Syria, can one believe that tribal religious disputes are fabricated by Syrian people themselves?
ولذلك ما نراه اليوم في سوريا لا نظن أنه من صنيع سوريا، وإنما هو مستورد من الخارج.
لكن هؤلاء الآن يمزقون بلاد المسلمين بأيدي من يسمون أنفسهم مسلمين. عن المستكبر الأمريكي أسوأ وأشرس وألأم من هذه الحرب.
أقول للأسف نحن الآن في سوريا لا نقاتل فئة معارضة، نحن نقاتل جيشا مستوردا من بلاد كثيرة.
Nieuwsuur heeft namelijk voor het eerst een Nederlandse jihadist uitgebreid kunnen interviewen en filmen. Yilmaz, een oud beroepsmilitair die nu zelf in Syrië vecht en andere jihadstrijders traint en opleidt. In Syrië zijn naar schatting 120 Nederlandse jihadstrijders die vechten tegen het regime van Assad en voor een islamitische staat. Er is weinig over ze bekend. Ze zijn in het geheim vertrokken en laten bij terugkeer nauwelijks iets los.
Relax. Most of the people here, I think maybe over 90% of the people here, have never ever even fired a bullet in their lives, let alone participate in an actual battlefield or whatsoever. So what we're doing right now, and the purpose of all this is, I was approached by a brother that I love and that I respect, and because he knows my background, he asked me, could you give some of my fighters some extra tips and tools? We'll supply the bullets, we'll supply everything you need, so that when we ship them out, and when there's a firefight, and when there's contact, they know what they're doing. fire! Hold fire!
سوريا الآن تقاتل بضاعة مستوردة من 80 دولة، بالإضافة إلى التمويل العسكري والمالي.
الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية تنقلهم من مكان إلى مكان تحت رعايتها، وخاصة ما وجدناه الآن عندما ينتقل من أفغانستان ومن الشيشان ومن يوغوسلافيا السابقة ومن أوروبا ومن أمريكا، وهناك من يستقبلهم في تركيا وينقلهم إلى سوريا وينقلهم إلى العراق، والسفن التي تنقل لهم المليئة بالأسلحة والغطاء الإعلامي من أهم كبريات مؤسسات الإعلام كلها تشير على أن الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية تريد من هذا البعبع وتحت تسمية الإسلام أن يكون لديها ذراع قوي يفتت المنطقة، يضرب المنطقة، يضرب منطق الوحدة الإسلامية.
شكون استدعاه ولازمنا نعرفه، شكون باش يقابله ولازمنا نعرفه.
الارهابيين راح يستخدموا طيران حتى يعني يستهدفوا سلاح الصواريخ، الارهابيين ما راح يستخدموا، ما عندهم طائرات يستخدموها. طيب ليش استهدفوا منذ البداية الرادارات وسلاح الصواريخ المعادل للطيران؟ كان واضحا بعد فيما بعد سهل للغارات الإسرائيلية، وكان مطلوبا أن يفقد الجيش العربي السوري قدرته على التصدي للطيران الإسرائيلي، وهذا ما قام به الإرهابيون منذ البداية، وهذا يفسر مدى الترابط بين هذه القوى وبين المشروع الصهيوني المدعوم من أمريكا ومن حلفائها في المنطقة.
Under the pretext of establishing the so-called Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, the United States has amassed Daesh criminals from more than 80 countries across the world. But it sounds interesting to hear that the leaders of the so-called Islamic State never deploy their forces for liberating a small area of the Levant, which is to say Palestine, as though to Daesh fighters, the only single blood that is worth being revered is the Zionists.
لا تقوم إلا على الذبح والقتل والتدمير وسفك الدماء والاعتداء على أعراض الناس ومحاولة القول بأنه هنا يجب أن ننفذ أمر الله لنذهب غدا إلى الجنة، ولا مجال إلا عبر قتل البشر جميعا. وهذه قصة يتشابه فيها اليهود وهذه القوى الإرهابية. إذن لا بد من تشويه الإسلام، والآن نرى إلى أي درجة تم تشويهه من خلال القوى الإرهابية، من خلال الوهابية، من خلال القاعدة، من خلال داعش، من خلال جبهة النصرة.
فأقول لهم من هذا الموضع المبارك: يا أيها المساكين، أما علمتم أننا جنود دولة الإسلام في العراق والشام ركلنا جناسيكم؟ أما علمتم أننا تبرأنا منها؟ أما علمتم أنكم أنتم وجناسيكم وقوانينكم ودساتيركم وتهديداتكم تحت أقدامنا؟ أما علمتم أن أميرنا أمير المؤمنين الشيخ أبي بكر البغدادي الحسيني القرشي، أمير المؤمنين الشيخ أبي بكر البغدادي الحسيني القرشي هادم الأسوار ومحطم الحدود وقاهر الكفار؟ أما علمتم أنه أمرنا وعلمنا ألا نعترف بحدود سايكس بيكو الخبيثة فبلاد المسلمين واحدة. أما علمتم أنه علمنا أننا إذا أردنا الذهاب لبلد ما لا نذهب بجناسيكم الحقيرة، بل نتمدد بإذن الله وبنصر منه ثم ندخلها. أما علمتم أننا جنود دولة الإسلام في العراق والشام، ودولتنا ستتمدد وتتمدد وتتمدد حتى تزيل عروشكم التي بعتم دينكم من أجلها.
I mean, let's remember here, the people we are fighting today, we funded 20 years ago. And we did it because we were locked in this struggle with the Soviet Union. They invaded Afghanistan, and we did not want to see them control Central Asia. And we went to work. And it was President Reagan in partnership with the Congress, led by Democrats, who said, you know what, sounds like a pretty good idea. Let's deal with the ISI and the Pakistani military, and let's go recruit these mujahideen, and let's get some to come from Saudi Arabia and other places, importing their Wahhabi brand of Islam so that we can go beat the Soviet Union. And guess what? They retreated, they lost billions of dollars, and it led to the collapse of the Soviet Union.
وإن أردتم موعود الله فجاهدوا في سبيل الله وحرضوا المؤمنين واصبروا على تلك المشقة، ولو علمتم ما في الجهاد من الأجر والكرامة والرفعة والعزة في الدنيا والآخرة لما قعد أو تخلف منكم أحد عن الجهاد.
الإسلام دين جاء لكل الناس، ورسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم جاء للناس كافة، لذلك علينا أن نتحرر من هذه العقدة ونشعر الآخرين أنه عندنا ثروة.
إذن كما ذكرنا على المستوى السياسي الاستراتيجي تفكيك العالم الإسلامي وإحداث فتنة مذهبية تمتد من طنجة إلى جاكرتا، أن يقطع المسلمون رقاب المسلمين. في أحد المرات ألقت جبهة النصرة القبض على مجموعة من الجنود السوريين، كل الجنود الذين ألقي القبض عليهم من الطائفة السنية، وهذا عار علينا أن نقول سني أو شيعي، ولكن هذه هي الحقيقة. ألقوا القبض على مجموعة من الجنود كلهم من الطائفة السنية، من درعا، من الرقة ومن مناطق أخرى، وبدأوا بذبحهم وهم يقولون نذبحكم يا شيعة يا رافضة يا نصيرية يا كافرون.
عاونهم الفوق اسمه بدك تقتله، الفوق اسمه بدك تقتله. والله العظيم سني من دراهم، والله العظيم سني من دراهم.
إذن قطع هذه الرقاب البريئة لأهلنا في السنة والحديث أننا نقتل الشيعة أو يهدف إلى بس جو من الفتنة الطائفية ومن التأليب المذهبي والتحريض المذهبي. إذن هذا هو الهدف الأعلى لهذا الحراك.
وبالتأكيد الذين يحاربون على أرض سوريا اليوم باسم الدين معظمهم هم من خارج سوريا، خاصة الذين يتطرفون في هذا الفكر، يعني المتطرفين الذين يذبحون ويأكلون الأحشاء، أحشاء الإنسان، قلب الإنسان، يقتلون باسم الدين المسيحي والمسلم.
لأن ما جرى في سوريا من جرائم يندى لها جبين الإنسانية على مر التاريخ، ولم تشهدها أي مرحلة تاريخية حتى زمن الحربين العالميتين الأولى والثانية، من جرائم يعني لا يمكن لإنسان أو لصفة إنسانية أن تقوم بها، يعني أن يرتكبها إنسان ينتمي إلى الإنسان، إلى الطبيعة الإنسانية، جرائم وحشية.
هؤلاء لم يصبوا بأسهم ولا إجرامهم إلا على المسلمين. أرونا ماذا فعلوا إلى الآن، هل ذهبوا إلى فلسطين؟ هل قاتلوا العدو الصهيوني مرة واحدة؟
فكيف بأبناء القرآن؟ السني يؤمن بالقرآن والشيعي يؤمن بالقرآن، يصلون لكعبة واحدة ويؤمنون برسول واحد ويصومون بشهر واحد إذا تريد تعد المشتركات تتعب.
الآن نحن نعاني كما ترون من البضاعة المستوردة من شذاذ الآفاق الذين جاءوا من هنا وهناك، والذين لم يعرفوا أنهم مجرد أدوات بسيطة غبية لتنفيذ مخطط إجرامي بحق سوريا.
The concept that humanity is teetering on the edge of a third world war is no longer the domain of the lunatic fringe. Those of you who have been paying attention know that in reality, the war is already underway. In this video, we're going to examine the profiles of the key players and the alliances they've formed, expose their motives, and present evidence of crimes that they've already committed. First, let's outline the basic alliances. Russia, China, and Iran have all explicitly sided with the Syrian government. Russia is providing air support, advanced anti-aircraft missile systems, heavy weapons, and training. Iran, for its part, has troops on the ground. For the time being, China is more preoccupied with the ongoing tensions in the South China Sea, and has not flexed its muscles in Syria as of yet. However, they should always be considered a wildcard variable. The current Iraqi government is also a wildcard. In 2015, they began to indicate where their loyalties lay in several meaningful ways. For example, they told the US government that new ground operations were not welcome, while at the same time announcing that they intend to look to Russia for military assistance. The list of countries pushing for regime change in Syria is a bit longer. The United States, France, England, Germany, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Qatar, Turkey, and Israel. If seeing all these characters in bed together strikes you as strange, looking at their motives will clarify things considerably. There isn't just one motive for this bloodbath. Rather, there's a matrix of motives which intersect in some rather odd places. Of course, money had to play a role. In 2009, Qatar put forth a proposal to build a natural gas pipeline which would have passed through Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Syria, to Turkey, and into Europe. The president of Syria, however, rejected this proposal. Instead, in 2011, he forged a pact with Iraq and Iran to run a pipeline eastward, cutting Qatar and Saudi Arabia out of the loop completely. It was around this time that jihadists began flooding into the region intent on ousting Assad. The West presented these groups as freedom fighters. The vast majority of these militants, ISIS included, are Sunni jihadists, which is significant because Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey, and Jordan are all Sunni as well. And Saudi Arabia in particular has a long history of spreading their preferred strain of Sunni extremism, Wahhabism, by investing heavily in building mosques, madrasas, schools, and Sunni cultural centers across the Muslim world. Now they have ISIS pushing it by the barrel of a gun. ISIS is not merely some dark aberration. Wahhabism as a philosophy calls for its adherents to take the reins of power by force and to impose Sharia law. Wahhabism also encourages its followers to persecute Shia Muslims, which they consider apostates. And of course, apostasy is punishable by death. Iran is Shia. The current government in Iraq is Shia and has strong ties with Iran. The pipeline deal which Assad accepted would strengthen the Shia bloc and expand its regional influence. The Sunnis don't like this. In fact, they've even coined a term to describe it: the Shia Crescent.
Let's be very clear. ISIS is not just a terrorist organization. It is a Sunni terrorist organization. That means it blocks and targets Shia. And that means it's serving the interests of Turkey and Saudi Arabia, even as it poses a threat to them. Because neither Turkey nor Saudi Arabia want an Iran, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon bridge that isolates Turkey and cuts Saudi Arabia off.
Israel also doesn't like the Shia Crescent at all, and they have decided to work with the Sunnis to form a parallel bloc to counterbalance Iran's influence. This is why Israel has launched numerous airstrikes against the Syrian government over the years and has provided medical care, logistical support, and safe passage to known jihadists. In 2013, Israel's ambassador to the US, Michael Oren, told the Jerusalem Post that, quote, "The initial message about the Syrian issue was that we always wanted Bashar Assad to go. We always preferred the bad guys who weren't backed by Iran to the bad guys who were backed by Iran. This was the case," he said, "even if the other bad guys were affiliated to al-Qaeda." Let that sink in for a moment. Now, at this point, if you were to ask any of these governments directly why they're arming and funding jihadists in Syria, they would claim that they are only supporting the moderate rebels, specifically the FSA. However, FSA commanders have gone on record to say that they cooperate with and conduct joint operations with al-Nusra, and ISIS and al-Nusra have officially formed alliances. And it is well established that the FSA command has been dominated by Islamic extremists for years. Furthermore, a think tank that was founded by Tony Blair released a report in 2015 which concluded that it was pointless to attempt to make the distinction between moderate rebels and jihadists, since the majority of these groups share ISIS's core belief system. It would impose Sharia law if they came into power.
أما فيما يخص بعض المصائب التي مثلا يطالب الغرب بتصنيفها كمنظمات إرهابية، جبهة النصرة. نعم، نحن نشعر أن هذه الجبهة بمكان ما هي يمكن الحوار معها حول نعم حول طبيعة الدولة القادمة، حول شكل الدولة القادمة، حول إمكانية هذه البلد على إقامة دولة التي تناسب الجميع. نحن في مكان ما يجب أن نتعاون ويجب أن نتحاور، وأنا على صلة بالجميع، أنا على صلة بالجميع ولا أخسرنا بذلك، حتى فيما يخص يعني الأخوة في جبهة النصرة، ونتعاون في أمكنة كثيرة.
In this context, the support being given to these groups can only be interpreted as material support for terrorism, which is a crime. Now, the US government has been arming, funding, and training these extremists both covertly and overtly since 2011. However, the support would have been impossible without the assistance of the regional members of the anti-Assad axis. For years, Jordan has allowed the CIA to run training camps for militant groups and has granted those militants safe passage into Syria. Qatar has also hosted these camps. In 2014, PBS visited one of these training camps and interviewed some of the trainees. One of the fighters told the reporters they were being trained, quote, how to finish off soldiers still alive after an ambush. Finishing off wounded soldiers is a clear violation of Geneva Conventions. It's a war crime. This is the hallmark of a terrorist organization, not moderate freedom fighters. Turkey has been the primary route for material and personnel headed in and out of jihadist territory for many years. A blatant example of this was the 400 tons of weapons that were looted from Gaddafi's armories, shipped to Turkey, and moved into Syria in 2012. At this stage, it was already clear that the majority of these weapons were ending up in the hands of jihadists, but nobody seemed to care.
Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar have also assisted in the transfer of heavy weapons directly to al-Nusra by flying hundreds of cargo flights into Syria.
And then there's the infamous Toyota trucks, which ISIS drives. U.S. counterterrorism officials made a show of investigating where they got these trucks, but it would have been much simpler if they had just called the U.S. State Department. According to the PRI, the U.S. State Department has been supplying Toyota Hiluxes, the exact model being used by ISIS, to the FSA for years. Knowing the real chain of alliances between these groups, it makes perfect sense that ISIS would end up behind the wheel. And let's not forget about the oil. At this stage, ISIS has reached a point where it no longer needs direct sponsorship. The organization earns an estimated $1 to $2 million a day through oil sales. The US was aware of this, but did nothing to stop it. They didn't even condemn the country which was facilitating the sale of this oil. Russia, on the other hand, began targeting oil convoys headed into Turkey in November of 2015. Shortly thereafter, Turkey shut down a Russian Su-24 that supposedly violated Turkish airspace for 17 seconds. In response, Russia released satellite evidence that they claim shows how Turkey is smuggling oil from ISIS. The US government dismissed this evidence, but didn't counter it with any evidence of their own. So where is the oil going? We're supposed to put that little detail out of our minds.
All along, there's always been the idea that Turkey was supporting ISIS in some way. We know they've funneled people going through Turkey to ISIS. Someone's buying that oil that ISIS is selling. It's going through somewhere. It looks to me like it's probably going through Turkey.
They knew, but they did nothing. Why? Well, let's ask Mike Morrell, former deputy director of the CIA.
Look, we don't want to destroy these oil tankers because that's infrastructure that's going to be necessary to support the people when ISIS isn't there anymore. And it's going to create environmental damage.
Right, and I suppose we didn't call out Turkey for buying the oil because we didn't want to hurt Erdogan's feelings. Clearly, it is not in the interest of the anti-Assad axis to eliminate ISIS. The United States and France are keen to make a show of airstrikes and special forces, but what they really want is the ability to operate in Syria militarily. This is the only way they'll have any chance of influencing the outcome. Trouble is, Russia is dug in. Unlike the United States and France, they have permission to operate in the country. And this has allowed them to set up bases and a strong anti-aircraft defense grid, which at any point can be used to enforce a no-fly zone. Washington is in a weak position. Can't really win from this angle, so they'll have to find a way to put Russia off balance and retake the momentum. It's important to remember the real stakes in this conflict. The West is in a state of decline. Their influence is waning. If the US and their allies fail to remove Assad from power, what they will be faced with is more than just a strong Shia crescent. If they fail, they risk being edged out of the entire region and replaced by Russia. This would give Russia an enormous amount of leverage in global energy markets. And this, of course, has serious implications for the petrodollar. For Washington, this is an unacceptable outcome, so expect the unexpected.
As you know, we've been covering the topics as well very heavily. It is an extremely important situation that's happening right now, and me and Aaron were just talking, and we're pretty much breaking it down to the U.S. and Saudi Arabia versus Iran and Russia. That's pretty much the kind of situation that's been going on. It's a lot more complex than that.
Yeah, there's more players.
But how do you see it, and how do you see it unfolding? Because with ISIS, with Russia, with also China and the United States and all these global world powers converging in the Middle East, it seems like a huge recipe for disaster.
Well, I think right now the big story is Russia's got itself established. It's established the S-400 anti-missile defense system, which enables them to put in a no-fly zone at any point. The United States is still flying airstrikes, and France and Britain are running airstrikes, but at any point Russia could cut that off. And Russia has bases on the ground, and they're allied with troops on the ground, which the United States would be up against a logistical nightmare of trying to go in like that, and they wouldn't be able to hold the position. So right now, Russia has all the cards. Yeah. So if this was just a non-important region, we might think, oh, this is over, but obviously this is way too important for the United States to let go. So my opinion is that there's going to be some kind of flare-up in some other, either another region or in another situation that we're not expecting, where they try to throw Russia and that block off guard. Mm-hmm. And what we're seeing with Saudi Arabia and Iran might be that. I mean, it looks like Saudi Arabia is intentionally provoking Iran. First of all, with the killing of the Shiite cleric, and then secondly, the bombing of their embassy. Where that goes from there, it's hard to say. It's a lot up to Iran and how they respond. But I think if Iran falls for it and does something aggressive, then they might use that as a pretext to do something very aggressive, like going after Iran directly on their territory.
And we see those alliances building up when we see Putin kind of posturing. He's also making an announcement that he has new nuclear weapons that could bypass the missile defense shield that NATO and the United States have been trying to build all around Russia. And he's saying he has more nuclear capabilities. He has those air defense missile systems as well in place. And also the Iraqi government recently changed their alliances from the United States to Russia because of all the moves that the United States has been making inside of the Middle East. A lot of people point to the point that this is all oil-based. We know that Qatar, Saudi Arabia were planning a pipeline with the United States to build it through Iraq, through Syria, through Turkey, to Europe to bypass Russia. Syria was one of those countries who made a stand, and there's been nothing but revolution and war and turmoil in that country ever since Syria made that stand. We see Iran, also a major oil producer, also making significant moves. We see the alliances shift and change so many complex ways, but is it really all about oil?
Well, it's more than oil. It's the petrodollar. Because if you have that block, Iran, Iraq, Syria, and then all those countries are allied with Russia. Mm-hmm. That's a major block of oil-producing countries, and it's a passageway to Europe and to the rest of the world to get that oil. That would give Russia and China leverage in currency to basically switch things off of the dollar as the primary currency used to sell oil. Yeah. And that would destroy the United States. That would be the end of the United States global control. That's really the crux of how they manipulate global politics.
Yeah. It would end the U.S. petrodollar, end the U.S. hegemony. We've seen that with Libya and Gaddafi saying he's going to get off the petrodollar, and then what happened to his country is got overthrown by NATO and bombed by NATO, and then the rebels came in. Supposedly we were supposed to be fighting radical Islamic terrorism and ISIS and al-Qaeda, but the United States policies seem to be harboring and fostering all these radical cells, and really just destroyed Libya and really made it a hotbed for terrorism. And also we're seeing that with Syria making similar moves with the oil trade. But with fracking also coming into the picture, with the oil market being devastated as it has, being as low as it has, with alternative energy also being suppressed, it is very complex to even see the future. But it's really interesting to see how, just that one major thing that could change, that one major resource that could change at any moment in time, has such huge global effects, devastating effects, especially, with people in the Middle East who are being victims of all this huge power clashes. China is also very interesting because we're seeing a lot of clashes between the United States and China in the South Asian Sea. We're also seeing China aligned with Russia and also back them up militarily. And then also there's the situation in the Arctic that could explode at any time too. Do you think any of those, whether it's alternative energy, whether it's China or the Arctic, what do you think will, and again, this is an impossible question, but from your analysis, from all the research you do, what do you think is the most important kind of battlefield that's taking place right now?
Well, right now, I think it's Syria. It could easily shift if the truce breaks down in Ukraine, and I think that's up to the United States, because it was the United States that basically told Poroshenko to back down. So if at any point the United States says go for it, and they start going after the East, then all bets are off, and then the focus will shift, and Russia will be put off balance, which I think is a kind of strategy that the United States might play, which they've done in the past. If they get deadlocked, which they happened in 2013, they got stuck with their Syrian situation. They tried in 2014 to push Russia off balance. And during that time when Russia was off balance, they made another move in Syria. So I see a lot of these things trying to make a move here, trying to make a move here, trying to get the other side off balance. But so far, Russia has outplayed the United States consistently. I don't think the United States has really thought through the end game. And if Russia wins, what they want is just to prevent a hot war. They're not necessarily looking to take over the world, in my opinion. I don't see that as being the game. But strangely enough, because the United States has made these moves, it pushed, like in Syria, they pushed to topple the Syrian government. It's actually created the very thing that they're afraid of. I don't think Russia would be in Syria in the next decade if it hadn't been for the United States trying to topple Syria. But now, because of that, they've created a situation where Russia is very likely to edge out the United States completely in that region. And this kind of thing can cascade very quickly.
Our top story, the Turkish army has exchanged cross-border fire with Syrian troops, according to state media in Turkey. Now, the exchange reportedly took place near a checkpoint in the Hatay region in Turkey. Here we have a map coming up showing the location. Meanwhile, reports are emerging that Turkish artillery is bombarding Kurdish-held airbase and villages in Aleppo province for a second. Just to reiterate, this is that region, the Hatay province, on the border between Syria and Turkey.
Now let's talk about this area that we're talking about that's hit by Turkish shelling. It's actually located in the strategic northern Aleppo province, and it includes the Menat air base, which was recently taken by Kurdish forces just on Wednesday. It's located at a very strategic point between Aleppo city and Assad, which has long been a stronghold for rebel forces. So by taking this airbase, the Kurdish forces is effectively blocking the rebel forces' access to their supplies in Assad and also their stronghold there. There have been conflicting reports as to which rebel groups had control of this airbase before the Kurdish forces made their advance on Wednesday.
Well, both America and Russia cooperate with the Syrian Kurds, despite Ankara's disapproval. Turkish military's crackdown against them has been going on since this summer.
And I can tell you now that I'm joined live on the line by Dr. Boutaina Shaban. She's the political advisor to the president of Syria to discuss the situation in the country and relations with the West. Many thanks for coming on to join us, Dr. Shaban.
And it is very clear that once the Syrian army, in cooperation with the Russian, are achieving great success against terrorists, some countries in the region, like Turkey and Saudi Arabia, are going crazy because they are the ones who are supporting terrorism in Syria right from 2011 until now. I think the best way to save innocent civilians is to put an end to this terrorism. And there are all the means available if there is a real will to put an end to terrorism. There is Security Council Resolution 2235, which should force countries to stop financing, arming, facilitating, and sending mercenaries and terrorists into Syria. Unfortunately, there is no international will to implement that resolution. We would wish that Russian and American and all countries in the world would join forces in fighting terrorism. This is the only way, instead of exchanging accusations which lead nowhere and which have no effect on the ground really. And it is the Syrian people, unfortunately, who are suffering the end result of this terrorism.
And we've heard more such accusations like you just mentioned. Sadly, the terrorist attacks occurring Wednesday in Turkey. Ankara is blaming Syrian Kurds for those attacks and also claiming that they are backed by the Assad government. How do you respond to those accusations?
I think Western viewers, I hope, would realize that it was actually Turkey who started the entire war on Syria. We have 9 kilometers borders with Turkey, and if you can imagine Syria without these borders, it would have been impossible to start such a war and to bring in so many terrorists from 83 countries from all over the world into Syria. And now, the moment the Syrian army is making real advances in liberating our cities and villages, Turkey is attacking our cities and villages directly because these terrorists were the means for Turkey on the Syrian ground. And once Turkey saw that these terrorists are failing or they are being defeated, Turkey jumped in to save them and to help them. I hope that Western world would stop looking at Erdogan's government as the means to help them, whether in fighting terrorism or in stopping the refugee crisis. It is Turkey who started the refugee crisis 4 years ago. It is Turkey who put on tents on the borders well before any Syrian refugee was on any border. Actually, Turkey dismantled our factories, stole our heritage, has ambitions to recreate the Ottoman Empire in the Arab world, and Europe has no interest in following this example. Plus, the Erdogan government is a Muslim Brothers government, and that's why they are launching all this war with their terrorist tools in Syria. And I hope Western media would stop looking at Turkey as an exit for the crisis or as a means of help to end this crisis.
Pete, I was asking about Turkish attacks on Kurds in Syria. I know that Syria's asked the UN about this, expressing its concern. Have you had a reaction, a response from the United Nations?
No, actually, unfortunately, we did not have yet any response. The Syrian government has sent over 300 letters to the UN about all these attacks and about, from the beginning of the crisis until now. And as I said, if there is an honesty in handling the situation, the Security Council Resolution 2235 is very clear, and it is under Chapter 7. And we ask the UN and we ask the mediators, everybody, that this should be implemented and Turkey should be stopped because it is attacking our cities, attacking our villages, and accusing the Kurds of things that they are not doing, because it has ambitions in our country and it has greed in our country and it is a Muslim brother government. That's really the whole point. And the refugee crisis, believe me, has been created, manipulated, and used by Turkey against Europe and against Syria. And the only way I can see very clearly is for Europe and Syria to speak together, and believe me, the refugee crisis would be solved and terrorism would be eradicated from Syria.
Now, the United States has accused Assad of fueling terrorism by fighting what the US describes as moderate opposition. Let's just listen to what was said.
He is responsible for ISIL's rise. Assad is a cause, not a cure, of ISIL.
So actually just listening to Philip Hammond there, the UK Defence Secretary. But the point here is the phrase moderate opposition, effectively Western-backed rebels that you're fighting in your own backyard. What do you consider them to be, moderate or something else?
You notice how many words people look for: rebels, insurgents, opposition. Anyone who carries arms against civilians, against government, against institutions is a terrorist. Political opposition should be dealing with politics, should be an opposition against a government, but by political means, without using arms, without killing people, without beheading people. You remember the person who ate the heart of a Syrian soldier, that was from the Free Army, and the Free Army is considered to be moderate by some Western countries. Moderate opposition. Can terrorism be moderate? Can somebody who is beheading people and killing people and destroying and raping women and attacking minorities in a country, can those be considered moderate? Can those be considered opposition? I want to talk to you in a Western frame of mind. Can Britain or France or the US accept any opposition that carries arms, attacks schools, kills people? I mean, why do they apply terminology on us that does not apply anywhere in the world? This is unacceptable, really.